The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, improve compliance and audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. Securing the modern enterprise requires insights into massive amounts of data. NVIDIA Morpheus harnesses the power of AI and GPU computing to help protect networks in a way never before possible, enabling 100% data visibility to provide cybersecurity analysts the tools to identify, capture, and act on threats and anomalies. Sign up for a free 1-hour NVIDIA Deep Learning Institute course. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/NVIDIA. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Dean Agron from Oxeye about cloud-native security topics, from the different types of asset inventory to what secure coding education looks like for devs. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. But first, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to, of course, subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, a Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. And if you have a specific guest or a special guest or a special topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows, submit that suggestion at securityweekly.com/guests. We review suggestions monthly, and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. And Mr. Kinsella, it feels like it was kind of maybe a slow news week, but I think we still got some interesting news topics here. So, we're just building up for the month of October as we get to this spooky Halloween.
Yeah, I know it really felt like as I was going through my whatever I had tagged for last week, I only found one article, and you found a few, and I think one or two of them I saw it. I just said I don't know why I didn't tag them, but it felt like honestly the slowest week of the year, I think, for me.
So well, clearly it was slow because you are not an Exchange admin, and you have not chosen to run your own mail server, which those that have out there have been dealing with an RCE, 2 0 days actually, an RCE and an SSRF. I kind of just am done with my statement there and just kind of move on, other than perhaps saying that it was interesting that everyone always talks about mitigating factors. And actually, we didn't talk about mitigating factors too much with Dean when we were talking about fixing vulns. But one of the mitigations when you have an unpatched 0 day is typically to what kind of regex can we throw against it? And I love regexes. And even in the write-up for the Vietnamese security organization that found this security company and Microsoft, they had to go back and tweak their regex. So it just kind of maybe that's the lesson learned, that for as powerful as regexes are, they remain the hieroglyphics of the programming world, and it's easy for them to make little mistakes, even when you're trying to rely on them to be your mitigating factor. And I think I've exhausted the lesson that can be taken from this. I don't know. Anything else? Help me out.
It's so funny because we're how are we so far? We're not even we're a minute into talking about something that this is a pretty massive thing for a lot of folks. And yeah, I agree with you. I think regex in general I love it, use it a lot. Well, use it some right now, but I think as a security thing, to use the technical phrase, they're really tough to do this stuff right. Like we've seen this so many times with cross-site scripting cheat sheets and everything else. All you have to do is change characters or reformat something, and usually the regex is going to break, unfortunately. Good to start with. So for folks who are out there who are like, hey, I want to try writing an IDS or a detection system, or look for patterns, or maybe it's just you're using grep. Great place to start. But as you go towards making a production security tool that's going to catch people who are doing those little character changes, it's time to start thinking about something else, or it has been for a while. Man, what can I say? It's funny. I'm going to go wide and then come in. So thinking about cloud mail, and we joke about who runs their own mail servers. I think at the same point, if you're a large enterprise, and you've got a strong team, and you know what you're looking for, and you need like not an Active Directory server, but like a farm of them, and like you've got your AD tree figured out, and like you've got a very custom AD setup going on your Microsoft shop, right? At that point, I can sort of see value in having your own Exchange server, because in most of these cases, the ability to configure and optimize and do specifically what you want for your organization is still going to be more capable if you're running that whole product yourself versus just depending upon Azure AD and M365 or whatever version of it you have. So I see the reason that some people might want to do this. For a vast majority of us, that's not necessary. But if you're a large shop, cool, okay, I get it. So I'm not just going to completely throw it at the server hugger thing. I think the vuln's interesting. I like the write-up. I feel like they're still adding to it because I'm seeing stuff I don't remember seeing last week. But what's the takeaway here on this is regex, I think, is a strong one. If you're writing for .NET and using DLLs, can you do version pinning, or what can you do to try and minimize some of these issues? Signing DLLs, how many different things. I'm sort of going back to what we're talking about in the last segment. Is like, okay, this is everything in here. There's nothing really brand new, right? Even like some of the past they've seen in other vulnerabilities. So we know there's a few things here going on. Can you study this and think about in your own environment, how would you mitigate each one of these? Or what sort of things have you thought through? Maybe not even mitigate, but like you've made, you've had those things in mind while you made some choices on your application. And I think if you're at least doing that, you're pretty far ahead down this road versus just going, oh, we'll deal with that later, or security guys will deal with that, or it's not that big a deal, or no one's going to attack me, or all the other excuses. Is at least read this, study it, and think about how does this affect what you're doing. Or, maybe we've got some OPSEC people out there. If you're running Exchange, or maybe you're running, I don't know, what's another mail server? Eudora? No, that's a client. Zimbra, thank you. Is that really client side?
Sorry, that's server side, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, on-site is what I meant, on-prem. But if you're running some sort of, let's say, postfix, think through how maybe you're running postfix on Microsoft, for those of you out there who are really, now I'm really going off tangents. But anyways, the point being, how would you try to protect against some of these things? Could you harden the Microsoft server in such a way that someone would come at you with this attack and you'd still be fairly, innocuous to it? So that's, I think that on something like this, I would try to think about it and have others do so.
Awesome. So let's see if we can also have you try and think about the Rancher article that I pulled up here, because I think it's similar in spirit. The headline kind of says it all. Rancher stored sensitive values in plain text, exposed Kubernetes clusters to takeover. Now, there's a couple aspects here that I think do tie back into our conversation with Dean in the sense that, yes, the pure security stance is never store secrets in plain text. Makes sense. But it depends, because you still need in service to service, connections and microservices, API keys, some type of service identity. It needs to exchange and say, I am actually Mike, who I claim to be, and that relies on a secret. Now, so you do have to pull this out of code, a file, an environment variable somehow. And maybe this ties into a little bit about the Lambda design patterns you were kind of alluding to as well. So I realize not everybody possibly is running Rancher out there for their cluster management, but I'm pretty sure everybody needs to have tokens, secrets at some point that they need to share. So what are the lessons that you would, send out to our listeners here, John?
It's interesting to think about. So the article is short, but it does link to the GitHub advisory on it. Wow, 9.9 out of 10 on the severity scale. And the reason I mentioned this is they've got a list of the various endpoints which are affected by it, along with the various fields, which are both fairly long. And the reason so is this is an administrative package, right? So Rancher, for those who don't know, is a client-side UI to allow you to create and manage both your Kubernetes clusters as well as deploying stuff out into them in that overall life cycle. Pretty neat. It's written by the Cloud Stack guys, and they're now off to do something else. So they're killing it. But yeah, it's again, it comes back to that same sort of experiment of like thought experiment of like, okay, well, I've got this thing. It's running on my laptop. It has I was going to say kernel admin. It has full cluster admin access to my K8s clusters. So, okay, how does it do that? Does it always have it? When I log out of this product and shut it, are those credentials still somewhere on the file system? They are. Oh, can I read those? If I happen to be running Rancher on the same system with my Exchange server, and someone breaks into Exchange, can they then go and get my Kubernetes cluster credentials? And these are real world problems. Mm-hmm. But that's sort of okay. So that's not good. What do we do about it? And frequently, when I had my Cloud Stack hat on the open source side, I would have said, well, this is on someone's local machine, so that's sort of for them to secure. And maybe I would have said that, maybe not, I'm not sure. But I know that at least passed through my head before. So with this, yeah, it's okay. We're 5 years later, 10 years later, is maybe that level of security is no longer acceptable. And we've got these remote attacks and things like that going on. So how do you want to go about handling it? So I think first step is actually just recognizing that that's an issue. Then what do we want to do with it? Do we want to have the user log in each time, and then if they quit, we destroy credentials? For some reason, it's making me think I've been using Autodesk Fusion 360 for 3D modeling for printing. And every time I bring that damn program up, they make me go and get my two-factor authentication and re-authenticate to it, which I think is partially for a copy protection, but still, I think that's right. There's got to be a line between, right? That sort of worst case. I guess 10 years ago we would have had, 2-3 decades ago we used to have the physical anti-copy tokens that you plug into your parallel port. But anyways, the point being here of how now you've got a problem. How do you mitigate against it, or do you want to mitigate, or maybe just you put something very clear in your? It would still be mitigation. You put something very clear in your doc saying, "Hey, we've got credentials here. If you care about it, maybe you click like the clear credentials button before you quit the program or something. At least have some sort of way around it." But I don't know. I'm throwing stuff out, but the general intention of what I'm trying to get across is again similar to the last one. Is what's the thought process around it? How would you? And I mean, you're doing this day to day, so how would you handle this with your teams?
Yeah, and this is absolutely where it's the idea of we have secrets. What do we have a secret management story? And like just one area where we can store everything, and what are the privileges to get to it? Mm-hmm. Do I need to have equivalent access to the command line to get the secrets? Therefore, I could just connect to other services myself. Or in this case, the real problem is you could be a lower privilege user that could get access to this plain text file or view the secret and therefore escalate. And it takes, unfortunately, it takes a long time to have that discussion and tease out, is the presence of this secret in a plain text file or in a blob or accessible in a secret store? What are the privileges associated with it? And that one's harder, I think, at least in my experience, to reason through in any programmatic manner or a linter. Mm-hmm. So we don't have the secrets management as code. If I'm going to try and riff on that from our last segment, to just be able to run a script and say, "Yep, IAM policies look good," or "they don't look good," and we can move on. So those are the kind of similar spirit of conversations we have when we say, we can't just have this exist. We love having secrets in memory, but we have to get them into memory at some point. And it's that transition that's always the tough, it depends kind of conversation to have.
And really what we've both just done is some form of a threat modeling experiment,
yes.
Right? I mean, so that's sort of, when people hear us talk about threat modeling or hand waving around that, this is sort of an example of what does that actually look like? And I guess to go back to the previous segment is anyone doing threat modeling as code? Could you do that?
I've seen a bunch of open source projects attempt it, but they always look like projects that have a bit of a dusty commit history after a year or so. So maybe this is our good request to listeners this week. Have you done any effective threat modeling that has involved more than just a Google Doc or something like that, because you can kind of see where, for as much as John mentioned computers that had parallel ports, I also have the ancient technology of just writing down documentation, Google Doc or similar with threat models. But let's try to move on to something else, maybe that isn't as ancient as parallel ports. JavaScript, but TypeScript. And speaking of, this isn't exactly threat modeling, but it is a way of helping with particular threats and doing more secure coding. John, are you satisfied with the direction that TypeScript is going?
The TypeScript 4.9 is very satisfying. So for those who haven't followed the details, new version of TypeScript has what's called a satisfies operator. And really, so what this is doing is, it allows you to see you've gotten some data from something in an object, right? This is the sort of standard JavaScript thing. You've got this thing, you don't know what it is, you try to use it, and something goes bang. Historically, in TypeScript, if you are not using, the equivalent of the wildcard saying you'll take any argument, you have to have some sort of level of control about what comes in there, which is sort of how it breaks things is at least for a first-time TypeScript user, the error is sort of hard to parse, compile time error, and it sort of leaves you wondering, what is this thing and how difficult is the language? So what they've come up with is this thing called satisfies. And what you do is you say, hey, the end question is going, is this thing I just got, this object, JavaScript object, is that of this type which I'm expecting? So it lets you do a test on it. Is this array which I just got, is this an array of strings? Oh, there's a number or something else in there, but that's not what I'm looking for. So, okay, now it gives the programmer a chance, what do they want to do with it? So that's it in a nutshell, right? It's equivalent, in Go, you've got what type of, I think under the reflect package, if I remember right. Some of the different languages have different ways of doing this type of thing or something like this. I'm curious to see, the big thing for me, it would be fun to come back in 6 months and go, okay, is this being used by people? Is this actually, did it just get added and left there and it's used by 3 or 4 like type nerds? I'm not sure if that's a slur, but there you go. Or is it being actually actively used? I think the good thing with TypeScript is the types. And the enforcement of that. But at the same time, I think for a lot of folks, it gets in the way. So the final thought on that, and I'll shut up, is I think what's actually allowed typing to catch on in TypeScript is actually the libraries which I consume, sort of those upstream dependencies, being written by people who care to use the types, so that actually when I go to use it, I have to pass through those types. Otherwise, so they're not just doing any, right, and just sort of wild carding that whole thing away, and there's your regex example again. So I think that's the good thing about it, and I'd be curious to see how this then gets used in that same sort of paradigm.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing I can add there, I like the languages, and I think there is a maturity in development, I will put it as, of adding typing or stricter typing because of the benefits to security. And I'm navigating a line there because we joke about all the fun and the honestly distractions people have about tabs versus spaces. Is it 2 spaces or 4 spaces, blah, blah, blah. Yes, there's a structure there, but there's also, you can get into the religious arguments of type versus non-type languages. Do they help, not helped? But I think I like the way that you phrase that to people who want to use it. They can basically opt in and help the complexity, I will use as the friendly term, of JavaScript to be more secure. And perhaps, would love to see, and maybe we'll have to create a reminder, see how many satisfies are being used within the NPM ecosystem, as well as I think it was last week we were talking about the object freeze, as part of that property within ECMAScript, how often freeze is being used to prevent prototype pollution and other vulns. So it's because there is this difference between, hey, we have a security solution versus, oh, look, people are actually using a security solution, and that gap can often be too wide. One of the ways, however, that the security industry tries to close that gap is through solutions like Dependabot, basically, I think, making that user experience a lot easier. Click here to merge. And I grabbed another article that was actually a little bit older, I think, from a presentation from B-Sides Las Vegas and what was the other one? And DEF CON. And this was someone who was patching vulnerabilities at scale. And I just threw it in real quick. I'm not sure there's much I can add to it beyond just describing the headline itself, but I do like the spirit of this approach in the sense of rather than having a pure bug bounty approach and telling everyone, you have a vuln, please go fix it. You also have a vuln. Everybody has a vuln. The Oprah approach to vulnerability management is that there's something better that can be done of here's a merge, click to merge, click to merge, click to merge, which ideally will actually be a merge that passes tests, a merge that doesn't, that can be trusted. It's not a malicious commit to throw a paranoid hat on. But that's a nice direction. But I honestly don't know just how over optimistic I am for wishing this type of thing could exist. And
it might not be you being over optimistic, but definitely I think the author here I'm missing his name, but Jonathan Leithchich, excuse me if I'm killing that, but that's what I get for not practicing before I go in there. And the reason I say it might be optimistic on his part is it wasn't always people appreciating that free card that they were getting from Oprah. In some examples, like I think it was Jenkins, those who never have any security vulnerabilities, actually asked him to stop sending them pull requests in general. So they just got tired of this. And I want to talk through for two things for a second. One is I've seen that in another example. Oh yeah, was it Summer of Code? I believe it is. It's not Summer of Code. There's another project out there. I think it happens actually in October, where developers are they're encouraged to go and report vulnerabilities in other people's projects and send PRs. And I think the top 10 pull requests or top 10 submitters get like a t-shirt or something like this. Open source projects, some of them don't like that either. And the argument I've seen around that is that people are sending PRs blindly without, and it's not so much following formatting or things like that, but maybe it is like you were suggesting or mentioning, they're not testing it, or maybe the project already decided that, hey, we're aware of that issue, but we're not going to fix it, sort of a won't fix type thing. So I see some of the downsides to bulk things like that. But at the same time, I think it's a good thing, right? So that's my thoughts on that. I was hoping for a little more meat in this article has. So I need to go check out his repo and see if maybe there's some examples of what that actually looks like. Back on the Dependabot side, briefly looking for feedback from our users, or maybe from, if we have any GitHub employees over there, I think we have at least one listening to us, is this thing, Dependabot looks cool, but from a IR point of view, there's space for improvement. So like there's one, usually a Dependabot, either it's something you're going to respond to immediately, the new updated packages there, cool, click to merge, we're secure again. But in some cases, if that PR or if the issue is in an upstream package that you can't fix, you can't do anything about it. Okay, well, I don't want to close the Dependabot alert. I want to know it's there. I want it to be around. But where I'm coming to with this is there's no way to like make a note on there or something saying, hey, I'll come back to this in 6 weeks, or we looked at this is word of promise, not ours. So, hey, GitHub, if you're listening, if you want to I guess it'd be interesting to hear from our listeners, how are they dealing with that if they are? Are they just opening an issue that's like of a special type and then like tracking the Dependabots through there? Or how are they doing this type of thing? And if I was a little less lazy, or had more time, I might have been able to Google this and see what people are doing. But I think the end is I'd love GitHub to add the ability to put notes in there.
That's why we have a podcast, John, because we get people to Google things and correct us or hopefully give us additional information.
Come on, internets.
Yes, come on, internets. But you're highlighting that idea of time, and I love my top hat. I love my dimension of time, of course. In the sense of we have an exception, but we don't want to forget the exception forever. We want to come back to it in a week, 3 months, 6 months, so what have you. That was a helpful segue into a Devops report, a Dora report, which is I highlighted just briefly. Just to touch on, I love the 5 metrics that they have for DevOps performance: deployment frequency, lead time for changes, a change failure rate, time to resource service, and reliability. I think all of which have good security or feature or emergent properties out of them, even though they're not explicitly stating security. But one of the things from the executive summary of this PDF, which yes, you have to go and go through a registry wall through Google Cloud, so apologies for that. But they say that high trust, low blame cultures focused on performance were 1.6 times more likely to have average adoption of emerging security practices. That seems pretty good. And that teams with low levels of security practices have 1.4 times greater odds of having high levels of burnout on their developers. And I'd like that I focus on burnout rather than just we're going to get exploited, we're going to get hacked, because it definitely talks to that idea of how much toil, how much burden are we throwing onto developers in an open source repo for, here's yet another pull request, here's another pull request, here's another one. No, I didn't bother testing it, but you should fix this because there's a CVSS of 7.3, which is terrible. Versus, let's actually talk about what's helpful to developers. Rather than give them a list of the 6 vulnerabilities within jQuery, for example, maybe we just tell them the latest jQuery version bump to go to and to patch. And it's that idea of how are we framing information and giving information that's actionable to developers. So that was a little bit of the soapbox I wanted to jump on to highlight the Dora report.
Not much to add. I mean, I think it's a good read. The thought sort of back to where near the beginning, what you're just saying there is, I think what our managers need to think about as they're sort of listening and working through some of this stuff is staff retention is a security problem overall, but an AppSec problem particular, right? And that comes back to this from the point of view of if your team is getting burned out because you're not able to move fast enough, in this day and age, they ain't going to hang around, right? They're going to get better paid somewhere else, and they're going to have a better developer experience somewhere else, which is sort of interesting to think about switching jobs for developer experience, but I have no doubt happens. Yeah. So there's security benefits to improving your DevRe, but there's also, just from the pure, like allowing this stuff to speed up and having that 1.6x that you mentioned, but also you're not going to be retraining people and having to rehire and find someone who is, good again, all that type of stuff. It's probably way worse than 1.4 if you think about it from a bigger point of view. And 1.4 is the burnout itself, I think you were saying, but the larger effect of it is significant. So lots of reasons to do this stuff.
Yeah, and a good point that what we're trying to, it's good for us, as you highlighted, this was a good article for like engineering managers to read through and understand. So would love to hear more about, this is, we're starting October, so interacting with the audience. Tell us more about who you are and the type of focus of articles you'd like to read, because I pulled out an article about implementing passkeys. Now, this might sound a bit of the wrong thing to do because we're talking about implementing a crypto-backed type of protocol, but I think I brought this up as the idea of education. So I think that even Dean mentioned this unprompted, I will say, in the last segment. Hands-on training is a great way to learn, understand protocols. And passkeys is actually simple enough that, as this article walks through, you can implement it in some essentially vanilla JavaScript, or in fact TypeScript they use, as well as some Python 3. And I thought that's a great way just to learn about what is passkeys, what is this authentication, WebAuthn protocol, how does it work, what are some of the concerns. And I wouldn't say do this implementation, toss it over into prod, but it's a great way to say, okay, as I implemented this, what did I learn about the design? Are there creaky parts of the design that if I did a WebAuthn 3.0 that I would improve on? Or I did this implementation, what's a threat model about the implementation I put in? What does it not consider in terms of logging? Or what did it miss in terms of information leaks or other types of, cryptographic specific types of vulnerabilities, or just other types of mistakes? So I think this would be the kind of thing that could be a good learning exercise, but not a production quality exercise. So I definitely want to throw in a nice big asterisk there.
Yeah, I think it's from that point of view, I was quite impressed with the blog post. It got me sort of browsing around the rest of this dude's blog. But so for listeners who are being actively encouraged by us to go read this and check this out. I mean, he's talking about, I think it's a he, right? He's talking about this from a really gets down, starts thinking about, okay, what's the data structure you need? How do you need to modify your databases to take this passkey type thing? Okay, what is a passkey? Where is it coming from? What browser supported? So I really like the way he's sort of broken it down. Bit of a long read, not too bad, but I think it's consumable, and it sort of allows you to sort of, and yeah, you're right, it might not be production quality, but at the same time, that lack of productionness, it's our new word for today. That lack of productionness is what makes this probably partially easy to read, because he's giving enough to sort of get the concept over at a high level. And I couldn't even tell you what language this is. Is this JavaScript? Could be. But that exactly right. That's sort of the point. It's like, I don't care specifically what the language is. It's readable code that sort of gives you a sense of like, how do you deal with this? How do you handle the errors? What's going on here? So I thought it was, if you're interested in this passkey thing, which I think all of us should be, even though it's not supported by Firefox yet, I think it's a good way to get up to speed with what this thing is and what it's about.
Yeah, and I think trying to tie a theme of other articles, Passkeys also ties into that aspect of secrets and managing secrets. And what's a secret that goes on the wire that could be intercepted, leaked, and does that matter? And one of the compelling aspects of WebAuthn, or like using the FIDO2 security keys, is that the way the cryptographic anchoring is done, that with WebAuthn, for example, your client keys could be, the public keys could be leaked, and they're public. It's in the name, and they can't be they can't be impersonated with phishing. They can't be intercepted and replayed because they don't have the key material that's in hopefully in your trusted module on your device. So there's also lots of good things here that are different ways to talk about security and how authentication is performed. And I'll take a quick breath so I don't exhaust that topic. I did pull in another couple of papers from USENIX. So USENIX has a list of their best papers, and they track them over the years. So I grabbed there's a long list, maybe a dozen or so, I think, for 2022. And 4 of them stood out for me. One of them were attacks on de-identification defenses, which for you privacy engineering-minded folks is pretty interesting, about a class of attacks called downcoding attacks that are basically re-identifying from quasi-identifiers or anonymized or pseudo-anonymized identifiers within data sets. Pretty interesting. There's another one about do's and don'ts of machine learning with computer security. I think we covered a related paper to this early on. And it also has a great website that it links out to called dodo-mlsec.org, which has a list of 10 pitfalls recommendations. So we might be developing yet another OWASP top 10, but this time for machine learning. There's another one about Let's Hash that was about educating developers on secure coding for handling passwords, but it was an interesting read just in the idea of how do we do secure coding training. And the one I wanted to end on real quick, at least in my list, was WebAssembly, which was showing 2 different implementations of improved security within WebAssembly, one using traditional formal methods of mathematical machine checked proofs of safety, which is nice and academic, and had about 3,500 lines of code to throw this on. And then basically another version that was a Rust implementation that pretty much had the same, better execution speed, had fewer person months to implement and managed, and pretty much had the same guarantees of security without the, quote, tedium of formal proofs. So I thought that was the Rustations out there might get a kick out of that, or enjoy the nod to their language. So John, I know that I always throw these up late on the day before the show, so I'm not sure if you had a chance to pick out your favorite paper yet from this, or if there's a different one you'd like to highlight.
Excuse me yawning while you mentioned the formal proof of...
That was an excellent sound effect. Thank you.
That wasn't fully intentional, but I approve that message. My favorite, at least from the headlines, was OpenVPN is open to VPN fingerprinting. Nicely done. I want to go back and read the Secure ML one. I thought that definitely sort of caught my interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I looked at this. I'm like, wow, this is a lot of reading, and there's a lot of really good stuff. For those who haven't been paying attention, there's some light teeth gnashing happening right now in the web, in the WASM community. So hopefully, that's not going to make that stuff fall apart. It's not going to change how we look at it, I don't think, but it's sort of under the hoods. Yeah, then you go through SOUPs, USENIX ATC, OSDI, NSDI, and that's just, yeah, I think it's probably closer to 2 dozen papers, not 1 dozen. And then we'll go back to USENIX Security 21. You could spend quite a lot of time here reading quite a lot of stuff. There's a ton of pretty neat papers in here. So it'd be interesting to see how do they figure out what's best.
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know the criteria here. And I think one of the other things I'd add too is that, yes, hopefully no one is yawning at the thought of academic security papers. Many of these do have links to the presentations. So also check out the presentations. And if that hooks you, dive into the paper as well. Yep. And because, yeah, there were certain things that appealed to me that I still haven't obviously read through completely. But poor John is yawning in the background, so I'm going to take that as a cue that I better wrap up quickly here. But John, now that you've coined productness for our was that our productionness? Yes. I have to give the tip of the hat to that and see if there's anything else you want to take us out with, whether it's a new slogan or just a message for our listeners.
Slogan wise, from our last segment, I added "It's complicated" to my T-shirts list. We're up to 2, 4, 5 right now. Maybe we'll do a survey at some point and see which one people want on a T-shirt. But I am collecting these. You had one more article in there. What's securing the Open Source Software Act does? What does it mean? I don't know. At least to me personally, this one feels like it's been. I don't know. I feel like I'm hearing about it a lot. I know it's super important. It's been we've seen this year the effort that the White House is going to secure. I mean, they're sort of embracing AppSec, you could say, which I think is great overall. I got to hear Bob Lord from CISA last week was talking at CSA's September event, which I was at. That talk is recorded. I'll see if I can get a link to it to put into the future. It was sort of interesting. While he talked about things at a high level, there was a few interesting dives, including, I think what's more interesting to me right now is not so much open source security, but that CISA really wants to help the smaller orgs out there that don't have a mic or a me or things like that. So it's great looking at this, there's a new bill out there, but what do we do with it? And it sounds like they're really trying to help in that space. So maybe we'll see if we can put a spotlight on that for next week.
Yeah, wonderful. And it's great to see that it's also pointing to SALSA, it's pointing to the NIST, SSDF, rather than we're going to have yet another new and improved standard. It's more of this exists, and it acknowledges that all the companies without hundreds of people on their security team and tens of $millions of budget need to have some way of implementing SALSA. So do that. And I guess I have to say one thing. If Bob Lord, if you're listening, I hope you got your FIDO keys and you've been beating that drum, because if there's one thing I know about Bob, he likes advocating for everyone using FIDO keys. So thank you for that. Thank you as well, John, for helping me get through the news this week. We'll make sure to get you some more coffee, and we'll send out some surveys about T-shirts for listeners. And thank you, of course, listeners, for putting up with us as we begin October. Please do subscribe, hit that like button, check out the show notes, and we'll see you next week on Application Security Weekly.